What's up guys, let's make our first glass shader and learn a little bit more about path tracing in Blender. This is the first episode of my series of procedural materials, and all the scenes and materials will be on my Patreon, but the cool part is that if you just want to make the material, we can do that through these videos. Clicking to like and subscribe means I'm one step closer to retiring and creating a gaming channel, so I really appreciate that. Let's dive in and let me know what materials you want to see in this series. We have this final preview of the glass, and I'll start with fresh settings and a blank material so you can follow along. Since this shader is a little fancy, I think it'll be best to explain it as we're creating it. Oh, and I'm thinking about starting a second channel where I just talk about life and career and 3D art and gaming, so if you're interested in something like that, you can also let me know in the comments. So let's just dive in and get started. So I have my objects here, and I've reset the materials to just a simple demo material that I've labeled M Tutorial Camera Glass on both of these objects, and as well, my rendering settings are reset. In the sampling tab, we have some presets for both the viewport and the render right here in this little graph icon, and I'll click on Final for both the viewport and the render. And I'll double check that denoise is turned on for both of them. As well, I'm going to go down to light paths, and this is really important as it's the amount of bounces we're getting with all the lights. So this one has a preset as well, and I'm going to set this one to full global illumination. If you're really crazy, you could set this to 64, but I think 32 is totally okay for this. For caustics, I'm just going to make sure that reflective and refractive are both turned on. They're both usually turned on by default, but we're going to want to make sure that they're at least activated. We need something that both starts the caustics and something that receives the caustics. So for our floor mesh here, I'm going to click it and just go down to the object data, and in shading, I'll see that I have the option to both cast and receive shadow caustics. For the floor, I'll click on receive shadow caustics. And for my objects, I'll make sure that they're both set to cast shadow caustics. So whether it's on the bottom or the right, we just need a new window to be able to open up the shader editor. And I think I like my preview just like this. I'll click on this upper left tab and I'll go to the shader editor. And as you can see, we just have a simple principled BSDF node. To get started, we're not going to actually turn on the transmission for this yet. Instead, we're going to work on our series of little procedural packs that we're going to use to amplify the roughness and the normal. Make sure that you have Node Wrangler installed, and we'll go to add-ons and type Node Wrangler. And I always have that installed, free with Blender. The first thing we're going to work on is our set of scratches, and the way we're going to create the base of it is with a very weird node called the magic texture. Now if I press Ctrl Shift, we'll see that we get this warped effect all over our model. And if I press Ctrl T on this magic texture, we actually get the nodes needed to map them. I am okay with generated in this case, but you could also potentially do UV mapping. Now to preview what these scratches might look like, I'll drag the pin out and type in color ramp. And this is typically what I use after each of my procedural textures to get the contrast that I'm looking for. It's like a built-in levels and color node. So what I'm going to do is crush down these whites very heavily. And then if I zoom in, we can see these small scratches. We can improve the look of the magic texture by setting the magic texture depth to 5. And I'll set both the scale and the distortion to 3. Now we can see that the distortion is pushing these small black shapes, and we're getting them a lot stronger. We're going to duplicate both the color ramp and the magic texture, and that way we could just change the scale of this and blend them together to give us more variation. If I press Ctrl Shift, we'll see that it's just a little bit different. I'm going to combine these two nodes together with a mix color node, and I'll set it to darken, but multiply could also work in this scenario. I'm going to create a new texture called the noise texture, and I'll preview it with Ctrl Shift, and I'm going to set its scale to something like 40. But it's a little bit too complex for my liking, so I'm going to see if we can either boost or decrease the detail, play with the roughness. To organize our graph, I'll drag our texture out of here and I'll select everything for our scratches, and I'll type Shift P to frame it. If I press N, I can open up our panel and we can give it a label as well, and I'll call this scratches. Now we can mix these two together with a simple multiply mix color node. So I'll get our mix color. We can get our second color for B and press multiply. And I do want to make sure that our factor is plugged into the B and not the color. So if I zoom into here, we can see that we have a little bit of bumpiness and some scratches as well. I can even press Shift P on this and give it a label and call it bumpiness. So with these two cool procedural textures mixed together, I can close our panel and we can type in bump. And this will convert our height map into a bump map, but we have to make sure it's plugged into height. And I'll set the strength to something like 5 for now. If I plug this into the normal and then preview our principled BSDF, And we can see that we have both scratches and bumpiness on our model, which is really cool. Maybe I'll set the strength to something like 2 for now. I'll zoom out and make a little bit of room, and I'll frame this and call it the normal map. And now we're going to work on our roughness map, which controls the shininess of the object. So if we have a lot of detail in the roughness map, we could end up exposing a lot of really interesting grunge. I'll add a new texture called a Voronoi texture. And we can keep the settings at default, but why don't we make them a lot smaller by increasing the scale? I'll set mine to 160. Then I'll get a color ramp, as I do with most of my textures. And what I'm looking for is a very, very small contrasted look for this. So maybe I'll swing these around and invert them, and I'll push the blacks in. I'll make sure I'm previewing the color. And we can see the dots got a lot smaller based on that color ramp. I don't have to have this at pure white, so I can decrease the strength of that a little bit, and that would be telling the shader that wherever it's black, it's super shiny, and wherever it's white, it's going to be really rough and doesn't reflect that much. Let's get a new texture with just a simple noise. And what I'm going to do is keep the scale around here, but increase the detail as much as needed. And I'm looking to get some sort of grungy look within our noise. I'm going to duplicate our color ramp and see what it looks like with the noise attached to it. And I don't want this noise to be appearing all over the model. So it's good that we're pushing these blacks in and getting some white values out of it. And now we can actually mix these together with another mix color node. So we'll plug that into A, that into B, and we'll preview this. And we can try out different blend methods. I could set it to add, and that actually worked a lot better. So we're getting the pure shininess in the black areas, a dirt layer that's really, really rough, and then maybe a sort of in-between roughness that could be a gray. That way the glass isn't totally perfect, but we still have a really interesting range. And one more thing we can add to this that isn't really accounted for in every single shader creation tool is the ability to actually read the geometry within the shader. So we can take a new node called the geometry node, and we have all these different options here. The one I'm looking for is actually pointiness. So if your model is high poly enough, it'll be able to capture the curvature of this model. Let's go ahead and take the pointiness and plug it into a color ramp. I can preview this and see if we can clamp down the edges of this model. So that's a really interesting mask we created with just the geometry data. And what I can do now is get a new mix color node and plug this one into B. And I'll set this version to add. And now all these elements are being packed together. And I can even lower the strength of our pointiness mask. And with just one page of nodes, we've built some really impressive details. I'm going to go ahead and frame these different sections with Shift P, and it'll make a little more room for us. Now, although I don't want the bumpiness inside of our roughness map, I kind of would like the scratches involved in the roughness map. So I'll take one more mix node. We can have either one into A, either one into B. I'll set these scratches to B, and I think I'll set it to add. So if I preview this, while it did exactly what I told it to do, I actually want these scratches to be pure white. So I'll take these scratches and type in invert. And if we plug that into the color, now it's inverted that texture, and we're able to get pure white where the scratches would be. So now it's a lot rougher where those two meet. And as a final color adjustment, we can always take one last color ramp on this final mix, make sure it's set to color, and we can push in whites further or even add a new level. And perhaps I want the middle values over here to be darker. So now it's mostly just the scratches that are being pushed into this, and that would make for a decent final roughness map. So I'll preview our final node, and we can see that it has some really awesome normal information. It has some really interesting roughness information. And now we can do our due diligence by turning this into glass with a couple of different tricks. So to do it to it, I'll set the base color of our principal BSDF to pure white. So to make this glass, I'll go to the transmission tab and set the weight to 1. All it took was one slider to have all the features communicate correctly for our glass material. This was not the case in older Blender versions, but this is a really powerful slider in Blender 5. But it's still not super complete because we can introduce dispersion. If you saw the original short that I did, I quickly built a dispersion shader, and now we're going to implement that into our principal BSDF node. So we're just going to do that with a couple of add shaders and a mix shader. I'll make a little bit of room for us first, and I'll add a glass BSDF node. Now, even though this is doing the exact same thing as this, we're basically duplicating that function, and we're going to do it 3 times so that we can implement different wavelengths of the color. So because this IOR is set to 1.5, we actually want different IORs for this. I'll be a little crazy and type 1.35, 1.4, and 1.45. We're sort of breaking the truly scientific PBR aspect of this shader, but it doesn't really mind because we're trying to create beautiful art. So all these are set to multi-scatter GGX. I believe the same is set for this one. And now what we'll do is we'll set each one to R, G, and B. Even though I'm just eyeballing it right now, I'm going to go into each slider at the RGB section and make sure that 1 is set for the correct value. So I'll click on green, RGB, green is 1, then I'll go to blue, blue is 1. And now combining these is actually really easy. We're just going to take an add shader node and plug them in respectively. And then with this being our main glass, we can take a node called the mix shader node, and we'll plug this into the bottom and we'll put the glass combo at the top. All we have to do to mix them together is get a pretty interesting node that's sort of like the geometry node, but instead of reading the geometry, it's reading scene data. So we have all these different options, and then what I'm looking for is transmission depth. So this effect will get stronger as the effect increases. So I'll plug transmission depth into the factor, and I'll plug our final result into here. It's got this crazy rainbow effect going on until we give it some time and we realize that it's actually generating the wavelengths we created earlier. Now, to make this even dirtier, I learned a little bit about the thin film option, and what it is it's emulating something similar to the refraction of wavelengths with this dispersion section, but it's basically a built-in version of it for really thin surfaces like bubbles or soap water or oil. It's a little bit of a complicated mix between these two values, but we're just hunting for a look we like. And what I found after a bit of experimenting was setting this to the same as our glass, which is 1.5, and then setting the thickness to 400. We're getting a little bit of that soap bubble iridescent camera film look on top of this glass shader. I think all we have to do at this point is to look at the volume output of the material output. And we're trying to emulate the milkiness or fogginess of a really old transparent material. I don't want to do it through the roughness because there's already enough interesting roughness data on here. So what I'll do is get a really interesting node called the principled volume node. And we don't need to look at a lot of these settings, but the absorption color, as I mentioned earlier, a pure glass isn't painted, it's absorbing color. So we want it to absorb our white and get a little bit milkier as it goes throughout this model. I'll set the density to 3, and the actual scattering color of this should be set to something like a fairly tinted blue, almost like over time that plasticky camera glass got filled up with old dust and fog. So we could always play with the density of this. I could set it to 6. I can lower the base color just slightly to make it a bit more aged, and we're starting to see these scattered elements fill out our transparent model. I think it looks really beautiful. And although it's going to be tough to see in a real-time preview, if we do zoom in, we're still going to get all the interesting scratches and all that beautiful dust. One tiny little thing I missed is that we could have gone back into our scratches and make sure that they share the same generated mapping nodes. And the reason why I brought that out in the first place is because with a noise texture, if I preview this in the material editor, but then I use a mix color node to bring these two together, I can then plug that result into the magic texture and it'll start warping and deforming this. So if you've ever used Substance Designer or Substance Painter, this is very similar to a warp function, but we're basically plugging the same mapping into a noise texture, and if we mix it, we can get the strength of that, and then plugging that into the magic texture will give us a little bit better distortion than what is typically included within the base texture. So I'm really enjoying that look. If I go back to the final preview, I could even make these scratches thinner on the y-axis by increasing the scale in that direction. So you have a lot of room to play with different options on this glass shader, and I hope you have fun using it. I would love to see what renders you make with it. I really hope you enjoyed the final result. Let me know what you want to see next. I'm thinking something subsurfacey could be pretty cool. So I hope you have a fantastic day. Make sure to subscribe or I'll be kind of sad, and I'll see you soon. Bye.